Hello my dear children, Namaste and welcome to another session of our Class 10 ICSE Biology series. I am Ambika, Master Teacher of Biology right here at Vedantu. I hope all of you are doing absolutely great. Now that we are well into our human physiology chapters, we are pretty much done with the circulatory system. I mean the most important or rather the most difficult topics that I thought you might need an explanation for, which were the structure of the human heart, the double circulation and conduction of the human heart, and also about the blood groups. So today will be our last session on circulatory system, wherein we shall be looking at some of the most commonly or most frequently asked questions from the circulatory system. Okay, so before we get started, let us look at a motivational quote. And yes, what I have to tell you is that you cannot have a better tomorrow if you are still thinking about yesterday. Yes, of course, this is not just for you ICSE children or class 10 children. This is for all of us in general, right? Applicable or useful to any human being. Because if you just keep thinking about the past, you are just not productive. You cannot live in the present moment. And as I have told you many times before, time is very, very precious. Every second is precious. Every minute is precious. So we just we can't afford to waste each minute just by regretting or thinking about the past, right? Because that will again adversely affect our future. So our goal is to live happily in the present moment, forget about whatever happened until yesterday or until the very last minute, leave all your worries aside, and for the next few minutes, let us focus on the questions that we have to discuss together. And not just today. Keep this in mind always, children. Even if you have a feeling that you have not been a good student until yesterday, it's not late yet. It is still the month of October and we still have 3 solid months left before your pre-boards. So have a positive frame of mind. If you start now, you can certainly succeed. Okay, children? And yes, assuming that all of you are completely with me now, let us look at the very first question. Choose the correct answer from the 4 options given below. While recording the pulse rate, where exactly does the doctor press on our wrist? Yes, we have all seen that, right? When you go to a doctor and they check your pulse, this is how they would hold, or this is how they would hold it. And they would have a timer also. But what exactly are they feeling? Is it your nerve, your vein, artery, or capillary? Just don't do wild guesses. I want you to think logically and then give me the answer. And by the way, this was asked in the last ICSE board exam, the 2019 exam, this year's board exam. And yes, the answer is the artery. Like you can see here, this is how the pulse is generally felt. But what is it that they feel? Isn't your heart somewhere in your thoracic cavity? Why is it that your artery in your wrist has to be felt? Well, one of the best places to feel your pulse rate is undoubtedly your wrist. Okay, in addition to a few other places, but yes, touching at the wrist or feeling the pulse at the wrist area does give the doctor an idea about at what rate, about the rate at which the artery is pumping your blood. Why do you think the answer is not vein or capillary? Of course, nerve is ruled out. It's only put as an option to confuse you, because right now, because we are learning only about the circulatory system, I'm sure all of you know that the nerve cannot be the answer. But in the exam hall for your final exam, when you have studied all your physiology chapters, you can't rule out the possibility of getting confused between nerve and the other options, right? So that is why, just to give you additional confusion, it's been there. But for now, we know that's not the answer for sure. The vein, why is it not the vein or the capillary? Capillary, yes, we say that it's not exactly a thick-walled tube like the veins and the arteries. It is a very, very thin-walled structure, which is in fact one cell thick. And how does movement of gases happen in and out? It is through diffusion. It is that thin. If it can diffuse, if a gas can diffuse into a capillary and out of a capillary, imagine how thin the walls would be. Right? So that is also not the answer. It's either your vein or the artery. Why is it not the vein is my next question. Well, for the simple reason that the arteries are your blood vessels that carry blood from your heart to the different parts of your body. So assuming that the pressure or the rate at which, the pressure with which the blood flows through your artery is pretty much a good indication of your heart rate, the wrist, the pulse, measuring the pulse at the wrist area is a good option. In the veins or along the veins, the blood always flows through much lesser pressure or much lower pressure compared to blood flow in the artery. In the artery, it's very, very high. Pressure is very high because the aorta alone is carrying or is attempting with full strength and with full josh to pump all the blood from your left ventricle to all parts of your body. So it's extremely high pressure that the blood flows with through your arteries, and hence the answer here is the artery. Okay, now going on to the next one. This is of course a 1-mark question, by the way. If you have answered this right, 1 mark is yours. The next one. This was again asked in 2019. A muscular wall is absent in capillary, venule, arteriole and vein. Yes, children, give me the answer. This is again very, very simple. Muscular wall is absent. I think I've just told you the answer a couple of minutes ago. Yes, that's a hint that I'm giving you. And yes, the answer is capillary. Like you see in this image here, this is the artery, the vein and the capillary. The arteries and the veins have a muscular layer. Of course, arteries have a much thicker muscular layer compared to the veins, but the capillaries are made of have a wall that is made of a single layer of cells. It doesn't have muscular walls to surround it or protect it, right? Because its function is to be able to diffuse gases in and out. And why are venules and arterioles not the answers? Yes, because it is the arteries that branch out into arterioles. So arterioles still have a muscular wall. Of course, they are finer or smaller than the arteries, and venules are branched out from a vein, or rather venules join together to form a vein. Smaller venules join together to form a vein, whereas capillaries are your finest structures as far as your blood vessels are concerned. So basically this is how it would go. You would have the artery, the arterioles branch out into your capillaries, capillaries join together into the venules, and venules join together to form your veins. Okay, and among all of these, thus capillaries would be the only type of blood vessels without a muscular wall. Okay, going ahead, that was again a 1-mark question. Now coming to another 1-mark question. Name the following: the soluble protein in the blood plasma responsible for blood clotting. Yes, children, we have not discussed blood clotting mechanism in our session, but I assume you must have an idea of this either from your lower grades or from your prior knowledge, any kind of prior knowledge on this chapter. And yes, the answer is fibrinogen. This, of course, you can't answer such a question without knowing the mechanism of blood clotting, without some bit of conceptual understanding or some bit of memory. Memory, because you have to remember the term fibrinogen, and the concept you need to know ideally should be how blood clotting mechanism works. We have another question coming up on this, so we shall be discussing more about blood clotting in that, but for now you can just have a look. Clotting factors. There are a lot of clotting factors that are involved, the names of which are not important for a 10th grade level. You will be learning those in your higher grades. But prothrombin gets converted to thrombin, and thrombin converts fibrinogen into fibrin. Fibrinogen is the soluble protein present in the blood plasma, which is responsible for clot formation. Right, children? And this is roughly how the 3 stages, or the basic 3 stages through which blood clotting happens. An injury happens, so you have a broken vessel, broken blood vessel, and then you have the activated platelets. Remember, platelets are your blood components which are responsible for clot formation. And the next step would be involvement of all of these, and then fibrinogen, the soluble fibrinogen, the protein converts into fibrin, which becomes a mesh-like structure forming a blood clot. Okay, this is the basic about blood clotting. This is also an important concept, so do remember to understand. But children, this is only a 1-mark question, so as long as you have written fibrinogen as the answer, that's all that matters. I've put the image only for your understanding and to make our discussion today much easier. Okay, so those of you who got this answer correct, you are certainly very, very smart. Go ahead and hit the like button right now, and we can confidently go on to the next question. State the main function of the coronary artery. Again, another question from the 2019 board exam. Coronary artery. Do you remember what this was? We have discussed this in our session, our first session on the circulatory system. We discussed the names of the major arteries and the names of the major veins. Among the arteries, the coronary artery was one. And the answer is that they supply blood to the walls of the heart. Because we learnt using an internal structure of the heart, we have not clearly seen where it is, where the coronary artery is with respect to the pulmonary artery and the aorta, right? But in this image, from the outside, you can see that this is the aorta, right? This is the left coronary artery, and you have the right coronary artery. And what do? They basically supply blood to the walls of your heart. And what would the coronary veins do? Obviously, the opposite, which is transporting deoxygenated blood from the walls of your heart back into your heart, and then the cycle continues. Okay, so main function of coronary artery, remember, coronary concerned with heart walls. Okay, now the next one. This is an interesting question. Identify the odd term in the following set and name the category to which the remaining 3 belong. I think such questions are really fun to work with. Just have a look. Based on your understanding of all of these, tell me the answer. Take your time. I'm not giving you a timer now. Pulmonary vein, hepatic vein, renal vein, and postcaval. Just to give you a bit of hint, in case you're wondering what postcaval is basically the inferior vena cava. Okay, children, and yes, your answer, the odd one out among these will be the pulmonary vein. Why do you think so? This is because among all of these, all of them are veins, but among them, the pulmonary vein is the only one which carries oxygenated blood, whereas every other vein in your body carries deoxygenated blood. And hence, your category to which the other 3 would belong would be deoxygenated blood, right? Remember that, children, pulmonary artery is the only artery in your body which carries deoxygenated blood. And pulmonary vein is the only vein in your body which carries oxygenated blood. But what happens without exception is, I've been saying this several times so that it just registers in your head, arteries in general, any artery be it the pulmonary artery or any other artery in your body, always carries blood away from the heart, and the vein always carries it towards the heart. And if the term pulmonary is given to you, you must remember that it's between the lungs and the heart. If the heart has to carry blood to the lungs, it means the lungs is taking up deoxygenated blood and giving out oxygenated blood, which is the only exception compared to all the other body parts, compared to the systemic circulation, the rest of your circulation in your body. Okay, this is an extremely important concept, children. Questions based on this can be asked in different types, so do not get confused. Remember, just this, pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein are the only exceptions as far as carrying oxygenated and deoxygenated blood are concerned. Okay, going ahead to the next one now. If you got this right, again, you get 1 mark. Given below is a set of 5 terms. This is also very nice. Rewrite the terms in the correct order in a logical sequence. Fibrin, platelets, thromboplastin, fibrinogen, and thrombin. Have a look at it. Take a few seconds. Just recall what it is related to. Yes, we had another question related to this. So even if you don't have prior knowledge, if you had paid attention to what I told you some time back, you would be able to answer this question. Okay, children, let us look at what it is about. Yes, beyond doubt, it is about the blood clotting mechanism in the human body, which means something to do with the platelets. This is how roughly it happens. This is the flow chart that represents the blood clotting mechanism. Okay, so what do your platelets do? What happens is, the moment you have an injury or a wound, who is alerted? It is the platelets in your body. Platelets are suddenly like, oh my goodness, yes, we have to be on our toes now, and they just rush to the site of the injury. Okay, so the platelets rush to the site of the injury where the blood vessels have been ruptured, and the ruptured platelets and the damaged tissues together release thromboplastin, something called thromboplastin. Okay, and in the presence of calcium ions, right, in the presence of calcium ions and vitamin K, thromboplastin converts prothrombin, inactive prothrombin, into active thrombin. Prothrombin is basically the inactive form of thrombin. And thrombin is formed only in the presence of thromboplastin. And thromboplastin is released only by the damaged or ruptured platelets and your damaged tissues. Okay, so far good. And then the active thrombin, what does it do? It activates or reacts with the soluble protein called fibrinogen. Pay attention, children. Fibrinogen is the protein we discussed a few questions earlier, right, at the start of today's session. Fibrinogen, it reacts with fibrinogen and converts it into insoluble fibrin. And what does fibrin do? Fibrin forms a mesh-like structure that you can see here. What is a mesh? You must have seen the wire gauze in your chemistry lab, right? Something like that. A mesh like a network-like structure. And finally, from that, blood serum gets released, and whatever is left behind, the solid structures that are left behind, are what form as your blood clot. Okay, so this is roughly how the blood clotting mechanism in human beings work. So now I want you to tell me what is the order of these terms that have been given to you. Compare these two and tell me the answer. Yes, what would come first? Obviously, it has to be the platelets that come first, correct? The platelets. Second would be thromboplastin. Yes, so platelets done, thromboplastin done. What comes next? We have thrombin next. Thrombin would be 3. So thrombin is also done, and then you have fibrinogen and fibrin. Fibrinogen and fibrin. And hence we have found the sequence to the terms that have been given to us. which will be in this order: platelets, thromboplastin, thrombin, fibrinogen and fibrin, just like you can see in this particular flow chart. Those of you who want to make a note of this, please go ahead, because I personally feel that this is a much easier way to understand the mechanism of blood clotting as compared to reading sentences and imagining it in your head. This will certainly come in as a handy tool, or you can even make a flow chart and paste it somewhere near your study table and keep looking at it, just keep glancing at it so that this registers in your mind. Children, blood clotting mechanism is a concept based on which questions have repeatedly been asked in the ICSE board exams. So make sure you know this inside out. Do whatever you want to get this clear in your mind. Okay, let us go ahead. If you have any concerns, any questions, do post it there and I will make sure I reply to it if it's a serious doubt, and make sure you understand it before we start the next session. Okay. Yes, distinguish between artery and vein. Remember, I had given you this as a homework question in one of the previous sessions. Most of you have given me the right answer. In fact, all of you who gave me the answers, at least I think 99% of you have given me the correct answer. Let us have a look at what is the major difference between these two. This is again a very important question which is worth being asked and worth knowing also from this chapter. Have a look at this table. This summarizes the basic differences between an artery and a vein. Now the first column that I have here shows or lists out the feature based on which the differences are, and this is about the arteries and this is about the veins. Okay, so first one is about the direction of blood flow. We know that arteries carry blood away from the heart, so it is from the heart to the body, A for away. Veins, it's always the opposite. They carry blood from different parts of your body back to the heart, right? So the first major difference is done. I'm sure all of you know this, so you have already managed to write 1 point there. The next one is about oxygen concentration or the type of blood they carry. Okay, arteries, except the pulmonary artery, always carry oxygenated blood, whereas veins, except your pulmonary veins, always carry deoxygenated blood. Again, this is something that we have seen. See how many different types of questions can be asked from the same topic or the same concept, right? The next one, pressure. What I mean is pressure of blood flow. And again, we have seen in the very first question wherein we discussed about the doctor feeling your pulse and it's actually the artery that he or she touches. And we said that is because the blood pressure or the blood flow in your arteries is much higher compared to that in the veins. Okay, the next one is about the anatomy or the structure of the artery and the vein. Okay, so this again, arteries have got thick outer walls and elastic muscle layers. Okay, and this is important, again, something that we've seen earlier, because the arteries have a much more important or an urgent function to do as compared to the veins. Of course, both are important, but if you had to give one a priority over the other among artery and vein, I'm saying artery should definitely be given a slightly better privilege because it does the most important job of carrying and transporting blood to all parts of your body, right? Of course, veins are also important, but with slightly lesser urgency, probably like 0.0001% lesser importance for the veins as compared to arteries. So yes, they need to have very thick walls to withstand the high pressure that they have in them, and they need to have a highly elastic wall and really thick muscle layers. On the contrary, veins would have thinner outer walls and lesser elastic walls and thinner muscle layers. Okay, now this is an image that represents the layers of the artery and the vein. You can have a look if you would like. Location, yes, location of the arteries, they are located deeper in your body, while the veins are located closer to the skin. How do you remember this point? The simplest way is to just look at your wrist. Remember, I told you in our previous session or in one of our previous sessions that when you look at your wrist, for most of us, the blue colored veins are visible. You don't really see the arteries from the outside, right? Which means veins are closer to your skin surface and arteries are at a deeper level as compared to your veins. If you can remember that, you will be able to manage to write this additional point. Okay, and valves. Yes, very, very important. Arteries do not have valves, but the veins have valves. Why do you think so? Think of it logically and tell me why you think arteries do not have valves while veins do. Yes, it is because the arteries, blood flow in the arteries is already happening at a very, very high pressure. It's so high, the pressure is so high that it can manage to just flow unidirectionally from the heart to the rest of your body. It doesn't need a valve. It doesn't need the support of valves. On the contrary, through the veins, because blood flow is slightly at a lower speed and lower pressure, there is a risk of backflow of blood. Instead of coming from your body parts to your heart, on the way it can get tired and go back to your body parts. To prevent that, it's been provided with valves so that it flows only from your body parts to the heart. Okay, children? So the major differences, remember these: the direction of blood flow, oxygen concentration or the blood type which is carried by them, then the pressure with which blood flows, then comes the anatomy or the structure of the artery and the vein, the location and valves. You have these many major differences. If there's anything more that you can come up with, do post them right there. It will be easier and useful for everyone to recall. The more number of valid points you know, the better it is to recall at least a few major ones among those during your exam. Okay, so my sincere suggestion is, for a question like this, it's not a good idea to memorize it. If you have basically understood what an artery does and what a vein does, you will be able to list out a lot of related points and recall them very easily for your exam. Yes, and now you know that diagram-based questions are very commonly asked, right? Especially in section 2 as a subsection of your 10-mark question. Usually these questions come for 5 marks, and you normally have 5 sub questions to make up the 5 marks. And yes, let us look at one of the most commonly asked questions, or one of the most commonly asked types of questions which was asked in the year 2017. Given below is a section of the human heart. Answer the questions that follow. Okay, have a look at this image. Okay, you can see that it's a section of the human heart. There's something labeled as 1 and 2, and I've shown arrows here. The first sub question is, which parts of the heart are in the diastolic phase? Give a reason to support your answer. This is not an easy question. You would be able to answer this only if you closely examined what are the things that are given to you in the image. Yes, there are hidden clues in the image. Have a look, take your time and give me the answer. And yes, this would be the answer that you have to write. The ventricles are in the diastolic phase. I've put the image here again for your reference. You have the atria and you have the ventricles, and it is the ventricles which are in the diastolic phase. Why do you think so? The reason is because the bicuspid and the tricuspid valves are open. You see that, right? It's very clearly given in the image. The bicuspid and tricuspid valves here, right, are open, because of which the blood is flowing from the atria to the ventricles, which means the ventricles are getting filled with blood, meaning that ventricles are in a stage of diastole. Okay, ventricles are in the diastolic phase. The first clue is that the bicuspid and tricuspid valves are open. Secondly, of course, the semilunar valves, which are here, are closed. Correct? They would open up only when the ventricles contract or during ventricular systole, because that is when blood has to be pushed out from the ventricles to other parts of the body. So semilunar valves are closed. And thirdly, atrial muscles contract. You can see that ventricles, or the lower part of your heart, is slightly in a relaxed position as compared to the upper part of the heart. But even if you did not observe that, I think if you have seen these two, or even just the fact that these arrows are given to you, you will definitely get the right answer. You just need to think logically. Just by looking at this, children, I'm telling you this from personal experience also. Sometimes I used to be the kind of student who, just by looking at this kind of a question, I'll be like, no, I don't know the answer. This is something very, very complicated. I certainly don't know the answer. But actually, it is such a simple thing. And the clue is given to you. If you have observed that, and if you understand what diastole is, you will certainly be able to answer this. So yes, 1 mark is completely yours if you have answered this right. Okay? Now, the next sub-question that we have based on the same image is this. Label the parts numbered 1 and 2 in the diagram. What type of blood flows through them? Yes, 1 and 2. What do you think they are? Yes, if you closely observe it, you would see that 1 is coming or opening from the right ventricle. The blood vessel that opens from the right ventricle it carries deoxygenated blood. So it is the pulmonary artery, which carries blood to the lungs. And 2 would be the pulmonary veins, the left and right pulmonary veins, because it carries blood from the lungs back into the heart. It empties into the left atrium. So this becomes your answer. What type of blood flows through them? Give me the answer for that. What does pulmonary artery carry? Remember, those are the exceptions as far as arteries and veins are concerned. And yes, the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, and pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood. Right? So the way you would be answering would be like this. 1 in the image represents the pulmonary artery and 2 represents the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, while the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. Again, a very, very simple concept if you have understood what arteries and veins are and what pulmonary artery and vein does. Okay, again, another 1 mark is completely yours. The third one. What causes the heart sounds lub and dup? This again can be a little confusing if you have not paid attention to the session where we discussed these. Remember, I told you that the easiest way to remember is just by remembering or recalling that we are talking about them with respect to ventricular systole and diastole. So what happens during ventricular systole and what happens during ventricular diastole? The sound lub is produced due to closure of AV valves at the start of ventricular systole. Okay, closure of AV valves. This is a key point there. Lub and closure of AV valves, or the atrioventricular valves. The 2 valves that are shown here, okay, they remain closed during ventricular systole or ventricular contraction. That is when the sound lub is produced. The sound dup is produced due to the closure of semilunar valves. These valves, they close at the start of ventricular diastole. Basically, the stage that is shown in this image is when the sound dup will be produced. Ventricular diastole. Okay, closure of semilunar valves. Okay, children, so read this several times, listen to this several times, and only then it's going to register in your mind. Lub is concerned with ventricular systole, dup is concerned with ventricular diastole. I think the easiest way to keep this in mind is lub systole and dup diastole. D and D go together and L and S go together. Okay, D and D. If you remember that, then this will certainly be the opposite one. Keep this in mind, and remember, we are talking about it with respect to the ventricles and not the auricles. Okay, and we have the next sub-question, which is name the blood vessels that supply oxygenated blood to the heart muscles. We have seen this before, that supplies blood to the heart muscles. Remember, heart muscle, we are talking about coronary, and if it is to the heart muscles, it has to be the coronary arteries, and coronary veins would be the opposite, from the heart muscles back to the heart. Okay, again another 1 mark is yours. So you've gained 4 marks in all in this simple question, which is great. And here you have a final question, which is draw a neat labeled diagram of a cross section of an artery and a vein. Yes, this may not be asked always, but this same question can be asked in different ways. You may be given the diagram of the cross section of the artery and the vein. You may be asked to label the parts or identify which is the artery and which is the vein, and so on. But just keep in mind that this particular question, the last one we just discussed, the 5 marks one, is a very, very important one. If you have understood everything I discussed in this, you are good to go and answer most questions that will come as part of your section 2 from this chapter. Let us look at the diagram now. The artery and the vein, roughly this is what a cross section would look like. What is a cross section? You imagine a pipe and you are just taking one section of it. The pipe is like this, something like this. I'm cutting it like this. I'm just slicing it like this and taking a very thin section from it. And if I observe that under the microscope, this is roughly what I would see. In the case of an artery and in the case of a vein, these are the parts that you would most importantly have to label. Okay, the connective tissue layer in both, the fibrous tissue layer in both, and most importantly, you have to make sure the muscle layers, you can see the smooth muscle layer in the case of the artery is much thicker as compared to the veins. That is the highlighting difference between the two. Okay, so that has to be definitely there. Elastic fibers, again here the elastic fibers, and the endothelial layer. Okay, so where do you bring in the difference? It is mainly in the case of the smooth muscle layer. So because of that, you see that the lumen, which is this opening, this cavity inside, the hollow part inside the pipe or the artery and the vein, the lumen is narrower in the case of the artery and wider in the case of a vein. A thicker walled pipe and a thinner walled pipe. That is how we could visualize the artery and the vein. So again, if you have got this right, another 1 mark is yours and you have managed to score 5 on 5 for a section 2 part 1 question. Yes, and before we sign off for the day, I have a homework question to give you. What is the difference between blood and lymph? Again, based on your understanding, you can give me the answers, not exactly a bookish copy-pasted answer. What do you think is the difference between blood and lymph? Many children have a confusion in this. So we will be discussing this at the start of our next session. But our next session, of course, will be a fresh new chapter. But this is also important to understand. So after discussing this for the first couple of minutes, we will be starting with another human physiology chapter. And the blood drop is thanking you for being with me till the end of today's session, for being with me in all the 4 sessions of the circulatory system. And do remember, children, to download Vedantu's learning app. Remember to join our Telegram group. Stay in touch with us through the Telegram group, the link of which is given below this video. And most importantly, if you have understood everything that we have discussed in this chapter, or if you have enjoyed watching the videos of this chapter, do remember to hit the like button right now. Remember to share it with all your friends, whatever board, whatever grade they belong to, if you think this will be useful for them. But I honestly think today's session will be most useful for ICSE class 10 children, because the pattern of questions that I discussed was mainly ICSE based. So share it with all your friends and remember to subscribe subscribe to our channel Vedantu 9th and 10th if you have not done it yet. We will be continuing with physiology in our next session, and in the meantime, any concerns, anything I can help you with, remember to drop an email at ambika.gopalakrishnan@vedantu.com or post a comment in the comment section below. And until we meet again, happy studying, and this is Ambika signing off. Bye bye.